Okay, good morning, everyone. How are you? Megan, can you hear me? Let me unmute you. Okay.
There we go. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thanks you. There might be a little initial background noise. It's going away in just a second. I've got my 4 kids. I'm trying to kick out of the house. I'm going to lock the door so they can't come in the house. We're in a small home, and anyway, it's a little bit hectic for you guys. I wasn't here the last 2 days. Hopefully, you guys didn't miss me too bad. I'm back. But anyway, we got a great guest today. Megan, if you would be so kind as to give everybody a little bit of your background history and by way of introduction, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. Really happy to be here and to be with everyone. I do talk a bit around the work that I do around regenerative agriculture in the fashion space, but it's not often with fellow carnivores. So I'm just super stoked. But yeah, so I currently work at the Savory Institute on their land to market team. And I think some other people from Savory have been on here before, but Savory is essentially trying to accelerate the adoption of regenerative land management within grasslands to restore ecosystem functioning, biodiversity, carbon sequestration. And the land to market team, we're trying to accelerate that mission by offering a commercial solution for brands so that they can more easily source materials coming from these regenerating landscapes, and then also have messaging or claims in our land to market seal on their product so that their shoppers and consumers can see that and recognize that, okay, this material or this ingredient is coming from a regenerative land base, and that there's integrity behind that claim, because what we're doing is a little bit different than others. It's based on a scientific methodology that's deployed at the farm level, and it's showing actual regenerative outcomes. So that's the program. And the way I became involved in this was actually through fashion. I've been a sustainability consultant and working in environmental sustainability throughout my whole career. But in 2014, I started to focus on fashion and fiber, especially particularly interested in the agricultural aspect of that. And I was pretty lucky. I took a job with a company called Eileen Fisher. It's a women's clothing company based in New York City. And my role there was to focus on the transparency of our supply chain, and also try to find sustainable materials for us to use. And it was one of the first positions in the industry that focused on transparency. And it was pretty mind-blowing how little fashion brands know about where the materials are sourced and who's making them. They typically have that insight into who's making the actual garment at a factory, but beyond that, where the yarn is spun, where the fabric is made, they often don't know. And that means that when these brands are sourcing materials like organic cotton or sustainable wool, it's hard for them to know what their actual impact is in the world from sourcing those materials. That led me to, I'm very, very lucky. I got to travel the world when I was at Eileen Fisher and went on this quest basically to investigate what is sustainable wool, what is the impact of that. And we looked at everything from animal welfare to, what is the impact on the land. And it was one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life, really. It took me to Argentina, New Zealand, and Australia. And it was really in Argentina where I met with a group called Ovis 21. And they're a network of sheep farmers, and they're a hub of the Savory Institute. And they really showed me what regenerative management, what that looked like and what the result was. And I saw degraded grassland ecosystems basically be completely restored. And some of the farms that I visited in around 2016, I revisited in 2019. And I mean, the difference was amazing. It was so tangible. There was so much more wildlife and bugs and different plants and wildflowers. It was green and lush, and it even sounded different because there was more birds around. Like it was really an amazing experience. but the kind of that aha moment was like, oh, okay, sustainability isn't just about minimizing harm or lowering our impact. We actually have this huge potential to have high positive impact. And so that's what I'm focused on now, is through the land to market program, is creating that net positive impact and then facilitating the uptake of those materials by brands. And I've been a carnivore for 3 years. It's also been life-changing. That's probably the second most life-changing thing. And it's been really interesting to see the parallels between sustainability and the possibilities of regeneration, and how the crux of it is that you're mimicking nature and how it's intended to operate, and getting those natural cycles functioning, and like how it used to be. And I've actually have seen that same parallel in my diet journey, if I'll call it that, around how this just feels natural. Like it feels like this is the natural and appropriate diet for me, at least. So I'll leave it there. That was a not too brief, but
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff we can delve into, and I've actually had the pleasure of talking with Alan Savory himself directly, also Bobby Gill from the Savory Institute, who you may or may not know. But one of the things that I think is, when people, when I think about clothing, all I've heard about was, some kid in a sweatshop putting it together somewhere in India or China or something like that. And so that's kind of, that's what many of us think about when we think about the problems of clothing. But obviously, it goes deeper than that. And I think that when you talk about just we'll focus on animals. I mean, but there's sustainable ways to grow plants as well, as I'm sure you're aware. Cotton and other things that we produce clothing from, and many other things. But animals, are more than just meat for us. I mean, we often discount, a cow is hamburger and some steaks, but there are literally hundreds upon hundreds of products that are derived from those animals. And so let's talk a little bit about, I guess, because the fashion, so you would have been involved in clothing. I mean, of the essential needs we have, one of them would clearly we have to eat. That's an essential need. Most of us argue we should probably wear some clothing of some sort. So, I mean, it's a pretty basic need. So let's talk a little bit more about maybe first on the animal side, and maybe I'll even touching on the plant side about clothing. Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would say clothing is definitely a need, especially in modern society. And yeah, one of the things that we're definitely looking at is whole animal utilization. And I think one of the sad things is that, especially in the United States, a lot of hides are just being incinerated or burned or just buried in the ground, because we don't even have the infrastructure to process those. And typically, too often, processing hides from meat industry is too expensive, and it could even be there could be a loss rather than profit. And sustainably growing these materials, whether it be an animal product or a plant fiber, I think we have to really put our values and put that monetary value on those materials. These are not cheap things to create. Like a polyester is very cheap to create, and it causes a lot of destruction throughout the supply chain and at its end of life. Whereas with these natural materials, there's this potential to really use regenerative agriculture, create these net positive benefits. Even with plant fibers, it could be a cropping system, but there's all these different practices that farmers can adopt to draw down more carbon, have better soil, and then the output from that is these beautiful fibers and materials that can be sent to artisans and created into these textiles that support traditional textile communities. So I think, and I see someone knitting, that's fantastic. Yeah, exactly. We want to support artisans in this process. Fashion gets a really bad rap, but there's huge opportunities to support the land and the environment and people along the way.
Yeah, I think the one statement you made about, we talk about environmental impact and we always think about it in the negative context, but I mean, positive environmental impacts is something we often discuss so much. It's like how can we, limit, greenhouse gas emissions and so on and so forth. How much pollution can we limit? But what we are seeing, and I've talked to many people in the regenerative agricultural space, is there is an actual clear. I mean, it's not even debatable. positive impact when you bring the bees and the birds and the wildlife and the grasslands and the natural vegetation back. I think it's clearly a win. And so in that context, what have you seen from, again, I guess we can talk a little bit more about the positive impact, and what's been your experience around the world with this, and can you quantify that? Because a lot of people are like, well, it's not just, it's not scalable, it's not sustainable, doesn't really make much of a difference. I would beg to differ, but maybe you have some insight on that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is scalable. I think it's actually much more scalable than some other sustainable like certification programs and that. And I say that for a few reasons. You don't need big machinery to do regenerative agriculture. It's typically a switch in the way you're thinking about the land and the way that the land is being managed. And we can measure the outcomes, and that's actually what we're doing at Land to Market. So we look at different indicators of ecosystem functioning. It's more than just a carbon test. So we do test the amount of carbon in the soil, but it goes beyond that. It's looking at biodiversity, how well the soil holds water, which is a very, very important indicator to look at. Because the higher the water holding capacity of that soil, the more that feeds the biodiversity of the plants, which feeds the biodiversity of the insects and the animals. But it also helps the farmers, the growers tremendously, because it adds resiliency to the land. When I was in Australia at the beginning of 2019, there was, if you remember, there were really bad droughts in Australia at that time. And I visited, I don't know, maybe like 5 different wool growers or wool farms. And it was really sad. It was a sad state of affairs because of the drought. Some of the properties that I saw were really just bare ground. They had to bring their sheep, all those flocks had to come into essentially a feeding lot so that they could feed them. They had to bring in food. And many of them had to destock, meaning they had to sell off some of their sheep to farmers across the country who were not experiencing as severe drought conditions. And then there was a couple, well, at least one sticks out in my mind. One farmer who had been using holistic management and focusing on the soil health of his land and managing his livestock in a way that mimicked nature. So all those regenerative practices that we talk about, he suffered the drought, but he didn't have to destock. He didn't have to bring in feed. There still was enough grass on his property. And when you don't have to bring in supplemental feed into your farm system, then that's just avoided costs. So those farmers and those growers are much more profitable because they've built up the resiliency in their land. And I think we can measure all these outcomes, and that's the start of it. And we have to really put some good science, empirical science behind these claims that we're making. But at the end of the day, when you talk to a farmer and they're like, yeah, there's a drought, but I was resilient and I'm still profitable. And I am really happy with my life because I have a profitable business and I can sustain myself and I can live in this type of way. That's where I get just so inspired. I'm like, yeah, this is what everyone should be doing rather than resorting to chemicals and tilling the land or planting a pasture. It's really focusing on those native perennial grasslands and enabling them to thrive.
Yeah, I think, this is one of the things where you can have, like, there's an argument about made, it's almost an argument versus socialism versus capitalism, where you have central planners that decide what's best for everybody, whereas in capitalism, the market will dictate. And what we're seeing, I think, at least, at this point, we've had 50, 60 years of this sort of destructive monocropping, degenerative agriculture. And now we're starting to see where even on a financial scale that these guys that are able to weather these adverse events, whether they be severe weather or drought and other things, that they're coming through. And so we're seeing that these practices may ultimately be the best, and they're going to be my understanding is it's naturally occurring without a push. A lot of these ranchers are discovering that if I want to stay in business and be profitable, I need to adopt this type of management system. And so if it's happening organically. Now there are some legislatures being, legislative bills being passed and or not passed, being proposed
Mhm.
to sort of do this in the guise of climate impact and carbon. But I think ultimately it's going to be financially sustainable for these guys or guys and gals that do this. What, coming from the fashion industry, you say it has a bad rap. I mean, what do you mean by that? People saying, oh, I know there's people attacking people that wear fur. There's people that are, vegan and don't want you to wear leather. And, there's, the previous mentioned concerns about child labor and stuff like that. But what are the problems with the fashion industry, and what specifically is being done to combat that? And can you tell us how to maybe support things that would probably be maybe better for both the environment, but also human? I mean, there's a human cost here, and a lot of people in their quest to save the planet in terms of the environment, totally sort of completely dismiss human welfare in that calculation.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, there's so much to unpack there. I'll start out with, yeah, so there's a lot of statistics floating around about how bad fashion is from an environmental perspective. Also from a social perspective, but one of the statistics that we hear all the time is the second most polluting industry. That's been debunked. It's not true. Not that we're not a polluting industry. So we have a lot to tackle because textile supply chains are incredibly long. We start out with agriculture, and then the fiber has to be clean and it has to be prepared to be made into a textile. And there's yarn spinning, there's dyeing, there's either weaving or knitting, and then there's garment making. And we change these supply chains very dynamically. So any brand out there is typically designing and making a collection, an entire line of new product 4 times a year. So that how dynamic that is can really cause some issues that we see, and it puts a lot of pressure on the factories and the other factories and facilities in those supply chains to get their goods to the brand really quickly, and also at a certain price. And those pressures have caused a lot of damage. We see a lot of pollution around dyeing, wages. They're not really fair wages, they're too low. And even when there is legislation that comes in to try to correct that, then we see brands just move to a different country. I mean, that's why most of our clothes are made overseas right now. A lot of clothes used to be made in the United States, they're in New York, but that's no longer the case. And so we see these human rights abuses, especially in countries where there's little oversight, but where the prices are just too low. So I think, there is no silver bullet solution to fashion. It's a fascinating global industry that is ripe with potential to create positive change. And from a consumer's point of view, what I personally do and what I advocate for is a couple of things. Don't underpay for clothing. I know it's like really enticing to buy cheap clothing, especially when it's on sale and you see like a $5 t-shirt, but what is the true cost of that material? How much time and labor went into that? And if the price feels too low, you can be assured there was exploitation of either people or land at some point in that supply chain. So it's buy less, but buy better and invest in what you're wearing. Textiles are this really amazing product, and they're time consuming, and there's an art behind them. And then the other thing is choose natural materials, because natural materials, we have these tools at our disposal now, like regenerative agriculture, and we can create that positive change, especially if we put pressure on brands to go in that direction and send those signals. And it's reducing the amount of synthetic materials to as much as you can, because they just simply do not have the potential to contribute to our environment in a positive way. And I'll add one other thing here. I feel like I don't hear people talk too much about this, but when you buy a synthetic material, it was made by a very large corporation that has basically taken the jobs of smaller communities that used to exist and still do to some point. to make textiles and grow those fibers and get them prepared for textile making. And I think that's something else we don't really think about. Every time we buy a synthetic, we're really just funding those larger corporations rather than the smaller landowners who are managing animals or crops. Yes, those are the things that immediately come to mind.
Yeah, so I mean, I really like the. Apologize, I've got somebody working on the house as well. It's kind of a confluence of crazy things right now. But when you talk about making an impact from a clothing, because one of the things I think is great about with the food, we can all say, hey, I want to eat and support people that raise animals or raise food in a way I find ethically and morally aligns with me, but you can do the same thing with the clothing. And so if you continue to put the pressure on the market will respond. It's just a matter of how many people are willing to do that. And so I have no idea. I mean, if probably fashion is probably one of the least things I'm good at. If it covers my body, I'm pretty happy. I think it's kind of like, okay, I did my job. I'm not out here being indecent, but so how does someone know about this? I mean, I couldn't tell you what came from. Is there a labeling? Is there something that's reliable? I mean, we see it in food all the time where, oh, I think I'm eating a grass-fed product, and it doesn't even mean that. So there's a lot of mislabeling. So how do we even know what we're actually getting, and how do we verify things like that?
Yeah, I think it's a bit confusing in food, but at the same time, food is so much more mature in their labeling of products than the fashion industry. There's actually been people in fashion right now that are calling for more regulation of claims because greenwashing or really, misleading the consumer with claims that aren't true or they're inflammatory. It's rampant right now. And we see that at all levels, not just at a brand level, but even textile suppliers who are creating new materials and they sell to the brands, they're greenwashing as well. So it's really off the charts, and it's so hard. I really empathize with someone who's trying to make these sustainable decisions and purchase, in a way that's in line with their values. It's so difficult. So that's one of the reasons Land to Market was created. It's not only a sourcing solution for the brands, but it is this seal that a consumer can recognize and feel assured that there's integrity behind that claim, at least for that land regeneration piece. We like to say that we're a voice for the land. So if you see the Land to Market logo, you can be assured that has been measured. It is coming from regenerative land. Other than that, though, I mean, there's all these other aspects in the textile supply chain. Some certifications are better than others. I personally like to invest in brands that I think are doing a good job. So it may not necessarily be this exact garment or product, but buying from those brands that you think are just in general aligned with your values. And that's why one of the reasons I felt like I was very lucky to get into this industry and work at Eileen Fisher was because that was a brand that represented my values with natural materials. Not that they're perfect, but they were on that journey. They were trying really hard to authentically be as sustainable as they could. And through that, really, it's around transparency. You cannot know the impact that your sourcing and design decisions have unless you have that transparency from farm all the way through to the garment. And what I tell brands is that if you want that transparency, that needs to be built in from the beginning. And we're starting to see that a bit more. There's a couple smaller brands out there that make me really hopeful. They're keeping these smaller collections that they can actually design from that farm forward. And since this is the Carnivore podcast, I'll also say wool is an amazing fiber, and that's something I wear all the time. And there's several brands on the market now that are making wool performance wear, which I think is an excellent alternative to synthetics. And the more that we can kind of support those materials while also supporting your local food and grass-fed meats and meat from regenerative land, then I think that will start to show that, yeah, consumers do care and we want to make better decisions, and we don't want to feel that guilt every time we purchase a garment because we know that exploitation is happening.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'll display my ignorance here. I probably could name like three fashion brands that I'm even aware of, you know. But so, I mean, just for those that may not know, who are some of these companies that are doing things the right way? At least you mentioned, did you say Eileen Fisher? Is that, did I say that right? Eileen Fisher?
Yeah, yes, that's where I worked for about between 6 and 7 years. Yeah, it's hard for me just to rattle off brands because I don't want to, I don't know. I don't want to like uplift ones that don't deserve it or anything. But um, last year I worked at Ralph Lauren, and it was really interesting to work at a huge Fortune 500 company, and I really wanted that experience of like, how can we move the needle with these big brands? Is it okay to buy from a big brand? Are they having just an exorbitant negative impact? And I think some of these big brands are trying so hard to do the right thing. Not that that is translating to a completely sustainable collection, especially when you're operating at such a large scale. But like even just going on their website and digging around to see what's happening, some brands are trying to talk a little bit differently. They are gaining that transparency. If they have initiatives to support farmers or networks of farmers, that's a really good sign, because that means that they're starting at the right place, and they have that opportunity to assess impact, and then and make sure they trace that material through the entire supply chain into the garment. In terms of others, just I'll go back to wool. I'm wearing Ibex right now. I love it. We're also seeing like REI come out with some 100% merino active wear. And then we have our members at Atlanta Market. So Timberland just came out. Actually, they came out 2 years ago with a boot made with leather from regenerative land. And we've seen some commitments from UGG, who's looking to use that fleece, the skins from regenerative land as well. So we're seeing a lot of movement in the right direction. You can also, you can look at our members. They're all actively engaged in this space. So that's one place to start. Yeah, those are a couple different options there to get people started.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that a lot of the hides that are being taken from say the beef industry are being burned or basically wasted, which to me seems incredibly wasteful. Is that because of this push away from leather? I mean, years ago, you buy a car and you pay upgrade for the leather seats and leather couches and all that stuff. Is that a direct fact that people are trying to get away from leather, that we're seeing a waste of this resource?
I don't think I don't think there's a direct connection between that, at least not yet. It's more around the cost of processing the leather. So in the United States, there's only a handful of tanneries left, and without those processing capabilities, the ranchers don't always have the option of taking their hides, preserving them, and then sending them off for tanning is just too costly. So I think it's more around the fact that we're not really valuing those materials enough to keep those facilities operating.
So you're saying because we've got cheaper alternatives, synthetic plastics, polyesters, that has displaced the need for leather. Is that what's going on with that?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it, and also the outsourcing to other countries. So where you might just have cheaper leather options and also less expensive processing because they're not following the same type of rigorous regulations that we have here.
Yeah, and again, I'm clearly ignorant of this. So when you talk about obviously I understand regenerative agriculture and the positive benefits for the environment, but if I'm making a polyester tracksuit or something like that, or whatever product we're using, what goes into that and how does that impact the environment?
Right. So polyester is derived from petroleum oil. So it's refined, it's made into a polymer. So it's just plastic, extruded into thin thread, spun into yarn. And so around 70% of all fiber that's produced annually is plastic, most of that being polyester. There's also nylon, acrylic, some other plastics, and they're all derived from petroleum, fossil fuels. And the problem is that at the end of their life, and actually during their life, they're constantly shedding little fibers, and that's a huge part of the microplastic issue that I'm sure many of you are aware of. So when we wash plastic garments, the little fibers, they go into through our wastewater treatment plants, but they don't get stuck there like a lot of other things do. They continue on into waterways and oceans. And this is one of the reasons we have just had so much plastic in the ocean. And they're very small, they're microscopic. So they are ingested by organisms in our oceans, and they bioaccumulate and work their way up the food chain. One statistic I read recently is that we're consuming around a credit card's worth of plastic. I think it was every week or month, but whatever it is, it's gross. And that's through not only food, but also water. And then at the end of the life of that garment, it's not being recycled. There's hardly any textile to textile recycling happening. When you do buy a polyester shirt or whatever that's made from recycled polyester, that typically has come from water bottles, soda bottles, those PET bottles that have been collected, chopped up into flake, and then re-extruded as yarn. And despite what some claims say, that's not, you can't just continuously do that forever. It is degraded to a certain extent. And it's typically, once it goes into the textile supply chain, so often you have these other components, you have tags, you have different dyes, you have zippers, buttons, whatever, or sometimes you just mix it with the other materials, which prevent any sort of recycling at the end of that garment's life. So there's really no good solutions around the synthetics, which is why I try to focus on the natural fibers.
Yeah, and I guess just to sort of maybe discuss some of these things, because I don't know what the percentages are. I'm sure in the United States it's higher than some other countries. Probably some traditional, more less developed countries, you're going to see more of the traditional fibers. I imagine, if you look at some indigenous guy running around in South America, he's probably completely using natural fibers. You see them run around with their loincloths on. But so, I mean, just to fully understand. So if someone's saying I'm a vegan and I'm going to therefore use the vinyl purse or the vegan leather, what I'm doing is I'm consuming a bunch of plastic, which will go, as I wash it, as I use it, it's going to break off. It's going to end up in a water supply. It's ending up damaging the environment. Is that a fair characterization? And then let's discuss, I could point to a few natural fibers: cotton, wool, leather, somebody mentioned in here bamboo, but what are the options for us, pros and cons? What are the synthetic things, and what are the natural options?
Yeah, well, I first I agree with you on the any of the vegan leathers that are out there. They're really, it's an annoying term. It's just plastic often, not always. There are some plant-based alternatives to leather. They typically still have a plastic coating or a resin to hold them together. And durability is also another issue. If you have a bag made out of plastic or PVC, whatever it is, it's just not going to hold up. A leather bag should really last forever. And in terms of other fibers, yeah, I saw the comment in here on bamboo. It's interesting. So any rayon, viscose, bamboo, these are almost synonymous terms. They all start with a cellulose pulp. So if you see rayon, that typically starts with trees that are cut down and they're chopped up, and then they go through this pulping process, which is a chemical process. And then that pulp, and the same thing for bamboo, you'd start with bamboo. It would be made into a pulp through chemical processing. And then it goes through a secondary chemical process to create the fiber that we often wear. And these are not benign chemicals. They can be toxic. These can be quite toxic supply chains in general. but there's also some really good groups out there that are focusing on these cellulosic viscose type materials. And they're looking at on the sources, basically the feedstock. So where is the bamboo? Is it grown in a sustainable way? Is it being grown in a region that's appropriate for bamboo? Or another focus would be forestry. There's a group called Canopy that's focusing on making sure that the wood that's used for these fibers is not coming from ancient or endangered forests, which are these primary intact forests that we don't want to use to create clothing. And then other groups are also looking at the chemical processing. If you've seen a fiber called lyocell on your clothing, that's a type of viscose that goes through a closed loop chemical process. And those chemicals are reused batch after batch, and they're not as toxic. So lyocell is a good option if you really want to have that rayon feel. And for most of the lyocell that's produced in the world, they are coming from responsible forestry sources for the most part. And then remind me what the other question was, like what are our options with cotton, or what was the other part of that?
Just because for those that aren't, aware of the different options for people, because a lot of us buy on, it looks kind of good and it's a good price. And that's how we shop for food. I mean, it tastes good, it's a good price, clothing, I'm not that sophisticated. I mean, if it fits me, I'm happy because I'm a weird size. And so I'm kind of limited in that regard. But so yeah, some of the options that most people may not know about or think about.
Yeah, so like I said, about 70% of the fiber that's produced annually that goes in the clothing is synthetic. So that leaves us with the remaining 30% that we can choose from. I think it's around 23 to 25% of that is cotton. And you may have heard some great things about cotton and some bad things, like it's, the most toxic crop in the world. And really it depends. Like cotton can be produced in a very sustainable way that contributes to the ecosystem. It can also be extractive and toxic. So again, it really, for cotton, the potential is there to create those positive impacts. And I would say buy from a brand that you trust and one that's reputable. And then the fiber that I'm most excited about is wool. It's my favorite. I think it's just so much opportunity for comfort and performance, and also using the sheep as a tool for the land to create that regeneration that we want to see. But then there's all these other fibers that people don't typically talk about or don't know about, and they're amazing. And it's not just, there's linen, but then there's these other bast fibers like hemp and rami. And those can be just also performance fibers that we don't see enough on the market, but they represent such a small amount that it's hard to, I guess, drive demand for these fibers when they hardly even exist in the clothes that we're buying. But yeah, and then other animal products I think are really important to support, especially as we see a lot more of this vegan messaging around fibers. I think it's really, really dangerous, actually. We're seeing calls for brands to stop using alpaca and mohair. So I try to support that. I like to buy various animal fibers. They all are unique, they're beautiful, there are noble fibers. And it's important because, traditionally, like these fibers are being, they're coming from herding communities, and whether it be Peru or other countries in Africa and South America. And I love the idea of supporting these herding communities and these textile communities that have been creating beautiful textiles with these noble fibers for centuries. So I think we need to support them as much as possible, and for brands not to just ban these materials because it's easy to do so, because they're not using that much of it, although it's a tremendous support to those communities.
Let me just shift gears a little bit, because you mentioned you went on a carnivorous diet, and I would be remiss not to at least touch on that a little bit. But
yeah,
in the fashion industry, I can't imagine I would imagine there's a bigger plant-based push within folks in the fashion industry. And so, I mean, is that a fair characterization? And then how and why did you make that transition? And what has been the response to people around you within this fashion industry, if they know about it?
Yeah, not too many people know about it. This might be my public coming out of being a carnivore, perhaps. But no, I mean, I do tell people, partially because I'm an advocate for the diet, but um, yeah, most people when they meet me, they're like, "Oh, well, you're a vegan, right?" I'm like, "No, no, no, I'm not. Let me tell you all the reasons why I'm not." But I've been just experimenting with diet for I don't know, probably over a decade now. It's just I did that traditional like paleo keto journey, and just kept seeing these incremental benefits. And yeah, so I started like just hearing about carnivore around 3 years ago. I think it might have been, I'm sure you were part of that, just with, and Joe Rogan was talking about it. I think you were on his podcast. And so there was just a lot of, I don't know, a lot going on in that space. And my initial reaction, I mean, I imagine other people have thought this too, was like, well, that's insane. And so I was like, well, let me try this. I have to try it. Let me see what people are talking about. And so I gave it 30 days and I never looked back. I was like, I've never felt this healthy. This has been such a like a 180 in certain aspects of my life. And then as I was also working on in this regenerative space, it just started to make more sense. Like, yeah, of course, because I'm more aligned with nature. I mean, if I didn't have modern society around me right now, what would I be surviving on? It wouldn't be vegetables. And it just made a lot of sense to me. People's reaction is varied. I think some people are horrified. If I don't have the time to talk about the reasons behind it, then usually I don't tell them, or I can kind of tell if someone's going to be a bit more open-minded. But it is a little bit of a difficult concept, I think, for people in this space. And the reason I also like to talk about it is not even to convince someone to adopt the diet. It's to get people thinking a bit more critically about sustainability in general and what that means. From a diet point of view, it's you have to start with your own personal health first. I mean, I don't care how sustainable we are if we're all deteriorating and unable to live healthy lives. So from that perspective, it's like, well, you need to be healthy yourself. And that's where I see like the parallels to healthy regenerating land as well. And I love the fact that I get to support that not only through my work and what I purchase for clothing, but also through diet, which, you know, you're making a lot more food purchases throughout your life than clothing.
Yeah, I think that sentiment, I've pointed this out many times, you know, we can't have a sustainable, healthy planet with a bunch of sick people running around. It just, I mean, even on the basic numbers principle, you know, in the United States, the healthcare system contributes 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions, if you want to use that argument. So the healthcare industry is a much greater contributor to greenhouse gases than the animal agriculture industry, which is traditionally around 4% in the US and about 2% of that being the cattle industry. And so I just think that's an important concept to realize. When we look at this in a holistic big picture, you have to say, well, where are the big, you know, the elephant in the room clearly are fossil fuels. Again, if we're going to make the greenhouse gas argument, that's 80% of our emissions coming from, you know, industry, energy, and to transportation sectors. But when you talk about health, I mean, have you noticed any improvements in your health since switching to an animal-based diet?
Yeah. I would say digestion. Like I didn't realize I was having issues before, and I clearly was having issues. And then just stability throughout the day. I don't feel like before I would always have to have a snack around, like just in case I felt like my blood sugar drop. That's something in my past. I don't have to worry about that anymore. And I would say there's huge mental health benefits as well, just like better mood in general and much more stable. And yeah, I don't know. Those are the big things for me. And yeah, I think some improvement too for like skin and all of that. But I mean, I'm not, and I don't want to say that it's like the silver bullet solution and everyone's going to feel like a superhero once you're on carnivore, but I've noticed just enough improvement and enough benefit to continue going. And the other thing for me, and this I don't give enough credit to, I don't love exercising. You know, I do it, but I think part of the reason I don't like it that much is because I have never seen payoff from it. I've never really like saw more muscle mass or felt stronger from it. And that changed with carnivore too. I noticed now I can work out and actually see a difference. So that was that was that was significant, I think, to see that.
What is your level of optimism with regard to what you're doing? Are you seeing is it sort of, I mean, there's been people talking about regenerative agriculture for decades now, and it's kind of, not taking off. Are you starting to see some level of this starting to take off? Where do you think it's going to be in 5 years, 10 years? What are your predictions?
Yeah. I would say that I am optimistic, but also realistic. I still think we're going to be fighting a good fight in 5 years. But I am very optimistic about regenerative agriculture in general, because of what you said earlier. It just makes sense. It makes economic sense for the ranchers and the farmers, which is huge. Where I've felt so pessimistic in my past was trying to accelerate the use of these, like sustainable fibers, whether it be an organic certification, because so often it was just a checklist that a farmer had to do these practices, and then all of a sudden their product was considered organic. And the business case was not there for that farmer, and they may not even have seen any positive impact, whether it be profit or more resilient land from those standards. And with regenerative agriculture, and especially because we're looking at the actual outcomes of their management, we're seeing that benefit. So that makes me super hopeful, and I think we're going to see more adoption of regenerative agriculture globally. We're also seeing a lot of interest from brands, and that's also really hopeful. One thing that would make me more hopeful, though, is if we saw commitments from brands to make less stuff. I think that's another important aspect of creating a sustainable fashion industry. We often will say there's too much consumption, and that's really unfair because you can only consume what's been made. So it's actually, I put that onus on the brands. They're producing too much. So I think we need to see them commit not only to these, we see a lot of commitments right now around carbon and being net zero, but we need to see them commit to sustainable agriculture, transparent supply chains, and limited production to what really needs to be produced and not overproducing. But there's a lot of great things to point to. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I would love to see much more garments and materials on the market in 5 or 10 years that are verified as regenerative. And I also hope to see the conversation become a bit more nuanced. One of the uphill battles is that everyone wants a simple solution. And realistically, when you talk about a system, especially an ecosystem, and how it has to be managed to create those benefits, there's some nuance there. There's some complexity. And even, talking to my peers around like a carnivore diet, I can't just say I'm doing carnivore and expect them to understand why I see that as sustainable. I really have to go into those details and explain it to them, and think about things a little bit differently than how we're used to, getting away from that linear mindset and starting to think in systems and around the biology of what's happening.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the consumerism, and you think about in years past, you go back several hundred years and people own very little clothing. They would have to make things last for, they'd make it themselves in many cases, they'd make it last for many times years. I mean, people would, not too long ago, one person would own one good suit and they would take tremendous care of that item, and they would wear it frequently, but it would be lovingly taken care of. Now we have kind of throwaway clothes where we just kind of throw them on the ground. If they get wrinkly, some people only wear an outfit once and they never wear it again. And so it's kind of absolute insanity. But I wonder if, like when I think about the regenerative agriculture space, I can point to guys like Joel Salatin and Greg Judy and Will Harris and Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta and on and on and on. I've got these examples of people that are not only doing it, but now they're setting up, teaching other people how to do that. Do we have a parallel within the fashion industry of people saying, hey, look, I'm making sustainable agriculture. Let me show you how to do it, so we can get more people who may not even be aware of it, learn how to do it? Because I every time I interview one of these guys, it inspires me to want to go out and purchase a ranch and do that. And so I'm sure if somebody can tell their story, other people are going to want to do that. So are we seeing some people we can sort of mimic or emulate?
I think so. I mean, that's sort of what I was hoping to do at Eileen Fisher, and what I'm trying to do now. Because when I was working on the brand side, I was working with one brand at a time, trying to create these supply chains with those growers, those regenerative growers, starting with them, getting their material into the supply chain and then marketed. We did do that at Eileen Fisher. That was part of my journey, was that not only learning about regenerative agriculture from the wool network in Argentina, but we used their wool. We immediately started sampling, and we brought that into our supply chain, and it was the largest wool program that Eileen Fisher produces is made with their wool. And that sort of led me like, okay, this is possible. This is doable. It's not the easiest thing, especially when you start out, but we can do this. There's definitely like videos that connect the consumer back to the farm. There's farmer videos, but I think it's yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to, do we need to kind of create more rock star ranchers and make them a bit more like of a celebrity in a way? I'm not sure. Part of me wrestles with that, because we don't want to just single out one person and say, they're doing it great. We want everyone to, to rise within this movement and to benefit from it. And it's a journey. But I would love to see more brands be pioneering here, and bring those stories to life, so that a consumer can resonate it with a bit more. It's not just data. It's a story. It's how these people's lives have fundamentally changed for the better because the material that you're buying, essentially. And we've seen that with some of the growers down in Argentina. There's this one video on the website now that shows how this one farm was in debt. Two brothers owned it, and through holistic management, they were able to shift that farm to be profitable and work themselves out of debt fairly quickly. It's a really inspiring story. So I think we need more of that. We need more of those positive stories out there for people to connect with.
Yeah, I like that concept of making someone a rock star, even though, I mean, we want all to, but if we as a collective community just push these people into a way where they gain this status, other people want to emulate that same path. And I think that's an important thing. Like I said, I unfortunately have to run, but this has been, Megan, this has been incredibly enlightening, and thank you for sharing this. I think you educated a lot of us on this other aspect of what's going on. Okay. Where do people go to find out some more about this stuff?
You can go to savory.global. Our land to market page is on that site. And the Savory site's really great if you need any of the science. There's a whole resource library. I use it all the time. It's really fantastic. And we're also on Instagram, and I'm not the social media person. Oh, they're gonna hate me, but I think it's just land to market at land to market. And then at Savory we're also on Instagram and YouTube. But I think you can get to all of that from savory.global.
Awesome. Well, Megan, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Hopefully maybe we can do this back maybe a year from now or something like that and see how things have progressed. But
love it.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
okay, everybody. Great day. We'll see you guys back tomorrow. If not, I'll see you guys. You guys have a great weekend. Appreciate everybody. Again, see you soon. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks again.